automatically triggered it. Okay. Hello. Now we're live. I did this whole fancy countdown thing that no one saw because I didn't hit the button. Welcome to the .NET Community Stand-Up. I'm one of the hosts, Kendra Havens. I'm a PM on .NET and Visual Studio. With me is my co-host, Jordan.
Hey. I work also on Visual Studio and Visual Studio for Mac.
Yeah. We have awesome guests with us today. The topic is container tooling. Mike, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. I'm Mike Morton. I am also a PM on the dev team. I work primarily on the container tools team, along with my awesome buddy Uche. And we also work on some other tools, but today we'll focus on our container tooling.
Awesome. Uche, would you like to short intro?
Absolutely. I'm hoping you guys can hear me with all my audio settings.
We can.
Yes, my name is Uche Nkadi. I am a PM also alongside Mike on the Container Tools team, mainly focused on Visual Studio Docker tools and the VS Code extension for Docker. I am basically Mike's counterpart for a lot of data, data querying and figuring out the nitty-gritty of what users do.
Yeah,
excellent.
I will say Uche is the data monster. If there's information we need, Uche can find it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having us on, Kendra and Jordan. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So before we dive into containers, which I'm very excited about, just some public service announcements. Build is happening next week. I almost forgot.
Geez.
It's a strange environment. I'll be on an Ask the Experts thing. There's going to be an on-demand video about productivity tips and tricks that Mika and I created together. We're going to have some testing interstitial videos that I think will be a part of a mainstream. They're going to be very fancy and produced, I think, unlike this show. So that'll be fun. Jordan, do you know if there's going to be some VS for Mac excitement or Maui or whatever
I think
platform teams are doing? Yeah,
I'll be looking forward to a lot of the discussion on the .NET side around the multi-app platform UI stuff, the Maui work that's going on. VS for Mac will be floating in and out of some things. We've got a lot right now where we're intensely focused behind the scenes on a lot of architectural quality, stuff that's not quite gonna pop as much just yet in the event, but you'll see us poking in here and there and starting to talk more and more about what's going on there.
Yeah. I think a lot of people will be excited to actually talk about Visual Studio 2022, which we announced was 64-bit in one of the .NET blogs. Whoa! So we announced it in a blog, but we haven't talked about it. So that'll be the main time we're all going to get to talk about it, talk what that might mean, talk about what we're seeing internally on our machines. It's pretty good. You can just it's pretty good. It's pretty helpful. And massive solutions. People are like, oh, we can just run tests now? What? Finally! I'm talking that was what I heard from my Roslyn dev. And remember, Roslyn has hundreds of thousands of tests, and it's a 4 million line solution. Probably more now. Anyway.
Wow.
So big things, big movements are happening. Also, Docker tools. So I know you guys have a lot of really cool demos to share today. And so what's new? What are some features you're excited about?
Yeah, we've put out a number of new features, and Uche and I will both kind of tag team and show you some of those. But first, I wanted to make sure we covered kind of why would you want to containerize your application? Because for folks, I imagine there's a bunch of .NET folks out there that aren't using Docker to containerize their apps today. And really, probably the biggest thing is it's just the portability you get. You can create this Docker container that not only has your application in it, but it also has any dependencies you have, and it's just this great consistent way to deploy your application. And today, containers are kind of the way. I mean, rather than a DLL or so, it's you just put your entire application, all of its dependencies together, and now you can hand it off to your DevOps or have your CI/CD pipeline actually build that container for you. So whenever there's a change, you can get that immutable container and then deploy it anywhere you want to any cloud. There's many services on Azure, for example, that run containers out to the edge, on-prem. I mean, containers are just a great way to create that consistent, and you kind of get this infrastructure as code. It's like the Docker file just describes everything that needs to be inside that container. Then you spin up that container or that image technically. And yeah, I think it's really beneficial for developers at some point along the line as they're developing to consider containerizing their application. Any questions or additional info there that you might want to add, Uche, or is that good? Did I do okay? No, I'm kidding. And containers are especially.
No, you did great, Mike.
Thanks, buddy. I do want to mention this is where .NET is just awesome over .NET Framework, because we get that you can deploy and run that anywhere you want, whether it's Linux or Windows. And Linux containers are much smaller and faster, so you get a lot of density. This is where operations folks love it. Is they get that immutability of the image that I give them where that gets built. And it's small and lightweight, so they get that density. So they can run a bunch of containers up in ACI, Azure Container Instances, or in Azure Kubernetes Service, or anywhere you want, any cloud. Containers are great for any cloud or any on-prem. So yeah, with that, how about I just jump in, and I want to show kind of the main two entry points inside of Visual Studio for building containerized applications.
That sounds great. Do you want to share your screen?
I will do that. And yeah, by the way, sorry about my messy garage that I got kicked out into, but we had water damage a few months ago, so we did this whole remodel. So I had to move my whole den out into the garage. So that's why you see the mess.
I love the arcades. It's actually looking really cool.
Yeah, it's two of my favorite pinball machines that I've acquired. So thank you. Yeah.
Is that Lord of the Rings?
It is Lord of the Rings and Hobbit. Lord of the Rings and Hobbit. So two really great, two different eras too, a 90s and a 2015. So
nice.
All right, so here's Visual Studio, just at the kind of the start screen. And I'm going to start just brand new. I'm just going to create a new project here. And we'll start with, everyone loves an ASP core web app. I mean, how can you not, right? We'll call this, that's it. How about my web app? Something really original. In fact, I may already have something called that. But we'll call this the solution. We'll call the solution my cool app, because we're going to add some other things to this solution. And what I want to show you here is when you're doing a file new, which in the real world, I know we don't do that often where we have this greenfield stuff. But if you are, you can just enable Docker right here. Simply check that box. And this is where you can choose between Linux and Windows, but with .NET Core, I would suggest Linux all the time for, like I said, the size and speed. And we'll go ahead and create that application. And like I said, I did do something like this. So let's do this.
You've been practicing. That's always good to see.
I tried to call it something different. So we're going to call this
01.
Yes, my cool app 2.
My old console app, 158.
I know. I'm up to 274. So I'll go ahead and hit create here, and we'll do that again. Now, what we're going to create here is just the standard ASP.NET Web App. It's no special template or anything. The only thing we've done is we've brought in a NuGet package for our tools, which will help you build the container and build the image, and when you go to F5, it'll help you debug and stuff like that. And the other thing that we do add is we add a Docker file. So here's the Docker file we add. It looks like a lot, but really don't stress. Quite often, you don't even need to go modify this Docker file at all. It's going to do the right things most of the time. This is called a multi-stage Docker file. You can see we use a couple of different base images. And again, don't worry, you don't need to learn this maybe at all, or at least definitely not to start. But we do this to make sure that we can build the most efficient and small image that we can. So I won't scare you anymore with that. So we'll go ahead and close that down. What I'd like to do is point out that we've added the Docker file. And up here, this is kind of your debug launch configuration. And we've set that to Docker. So I can just hit F5. And what's going to happen, let me actually show the output window here, is we're actually going to build the image and put that on disk. And then we're going to fire up a container from that image. And then we're going to hook up the debugger. And pretty much everything's going to look and feel just like you would expect it to. You can see that the debugger's hooked up. And now we're going to launch. Oh, and of course, it went on my other window. Let me slide that over. We went ahead and opened up the web browser, and it's debugging just like you would expect. And in fact, just to prove that it's debugging, because I'm sure Kendra doesn't believe me.
I mean, I see the orange bar, but
right, that's kind of the giveaway, right? So we'll prove it. We'll set a breakpoint. Excellent.
Do you have music going on in the background? It's kind of a nice, like, calm intro. Maybe that's my machine. Sorry, continue going on.
Did we have background music?
There was a nice epic like theme going with it for a moment. It actually was really nice.
It was actually my Hobbit machine. If you leave it on for like a half hour or so and you don't touch it, it's like, hey, come put quarters in me.
Let's go.
So it plays a little background music, so we should be good for a half hour or so.
Oh, that's so funny. Okay, continue.
So you can see, I went ahead and hit the privacy page, and we get our breakpoint. And there's not really any code there, but breakpoint hit, and debugging is just to be clear, just working as you would expect. So yeah, it's really, that's how easy it is to get started working with containers. Now we'll show you more. For example, let me show you the other path. So we have our web app. Let me add another project here. We'll add a new project. I'm going to do a web API here just to make it different. And of course, we should call this, what do we call the other one? My web API. We better throw 2 on there, because who knows? And I'm not going to enable Docker. The reason I'm not is this is going to be the situation. Let's say you have an existing application and you want to containerize it, something you've been working on for a while. Excuse me. And our tools make that real easy also. All you have to do is, here we have and I spelled it with a K. I don't know why I did that, but we did. Oops, sorry, wrong one. So I'll go ahead and I'll right click on my new API project, and you'll see here in the add dialog, I can just say add Docker support. And when I do that, I'm prompted for which OS. I'll go ahead and pick Linux. How's that looking? Is that screen sharing looking okay?
Yeah, it's looking good.
Okay. To be honest, you all just went so quiet, I got a little nervous that I was talking to myself.
No, we're all still here.
All right, excellent. So what you'll see is when I added Docker support, you'll see that we added the Docker file again. And if I want to just F5 this web API inside a container, I can do so just like I did on that first application. So those are the 2 main entry points. You kind of have the greenfield entry point where you can add Docker from day one, or you can choose to add Docker at any time for an existing application. One thing I want to mention is when you want to add Docker support, you can do that not only to a .NET Core app, because that's mainly what we've been working with, but you can also do that for a full framework app that you have. So we do support .NET full framework applications also. So that's really handy. And so here's that web API that I Dockerized. If I make that the startup project and I go ahead and just hit F5, again, we're going to build that image, spin up that container, hook up that debugger, just like you would expect, which is, I think, what folks love about it, or will love about it when they give this a try. And of course, because of the beauty of Swagger, I get the great Swagger UI, and I can try that out, and I can hit breakpoints just like before. But I think you believe me now, so I don't have to go through that. Let me point out, though, we do have debugging. So I've shown you that we do get debugging, but there's another thing, and I'll just touch on this, and Uche will go into more details here in a minute, is we have the containers tool window down here. And this can really help when you want to diagnose your application. So if I zoom in here, you can see that you can look at your containers. So we have a tab for containers, and then we have a second tab here for images. And so if you want to look at container information, I can look at these different kinds of things. And again, Uche will go into detail because he's been working with his few developers to add some cool new features. And so I'll let him show those off. But I just want to point out that this tool window can really be a big benefit when you're working with containers. All right, I'm going to show you one more thing after I drink my coffee, which is very important. So you saw I had to switch back and forth between these two apps depending on which one I wanted to make the startup project. Well, Docker has a thing called Compose with a C, and Docker Compose lets you start up one or many services or containers at a time. It also lets you do a lot of more powerful things. It's not just the fact you can start up one or two, but often when you're doing a Docker command, there's a Docker run command, and you have a lot of arguments you have to add. But with the Docker Compose file, you can put all of that into the Compose file, which is great because then you can hand that Compose file to someone and they don't have to know all of the switches and parameters. And maybe you want to do some volume mounts to mount a volume inside your container. You can do all that in the Compose file, which is really nice. So we support Docker Compose also. So if I go here to my web API project, and if I right click again, and we're going to do add, and if I add here, I'm going to add container orchestration support. And Docker Compose, I wouldn't call it a container orchestrator, but this is where it made the most sense for us to put this option, to be honest. We've gone back and forth on whether we should change this, but this is where it is today. I just choose Docker Compose, and again, choose the target OS, which typically is going to be the same. And what this is going to do is you'll see it's actually added a third project. I'm gonna shrink this one down. So we now have a Docker Compose project. And what that's going to do is, it gives me my Docker Compose file where you'll see it's very simple. It says, hey, I want a service called, that darn K is going to drive me crazy, but I'll leave it just so I don't mess it up. I want a service called this. And the way you spin that service up is go here and build that Docker file and then spin up the image that is created from that Docker file. Really simple.
So Mike, I'd also love to chime in for a second and mention that some users really like Docker Compose, especially because they find it just a little bit easier to do certain things in a Compose file than a Docker file, as well as sort of creating, instead of say running multiple Docker files to build multiple images and then figuring out the right way to interconnect them in a network, a Docker Compose file gives you your own Docker network. So however many services can much more easily interact with each other. And on top of that, that gives us the ability as a developer to establish a well-defined routes and well-defined communication before they then take it up to another level, sort of in the cloud.
Yeah, that's a great point, Uche. Like Uche said, this service, I can actually call this service from another service. Like here, let me do this. Let me go to the web app and let me do that same add and say, hey, on this web app, I also want Docker Compose. And then this will really show what Uche just said. And you'll notice here in the Compose file, now we have both those services. And these services can talk to each other by their friendly names here. So I don't have to know these crazy IP addresses or stuff because like Uche said, you get that Docker network and all of these services are on that network. So that's a great add. Thanks, Uche. So now that I have,
go ahead. Just a small question in chat. That container window that you showed, is that new?
So it's actually not. That's been around for actually, I'm going to say well over a year. And we've been trying to get the word out. But no, there are some new tabs over here that Uche will go over. But the window itself has been around for over a year and a half. So go use it. Cool. If it doesn't pop up for you automatically, just go up to the search and you can type in containers and you'll find it as that. Or you can go the harder way is you can go here and do view other windows and find the containers window. And it starts out kind of small, but often I'll drag this around and make it bigger. So yeah, give it a try. I think you'll find it really helpful if you're doing containers.
Yeah, another question. Thank you. Are we able to install Kubernetes in a Windows machine using Docker Desktop? If yes, do we need WSL2 to do it?
So the great question. The new versions of Windows Docker Desktop uses, by default, will use WSL2 to run its Linux containers. What's a great thing about Docker Desktop, and here, let me go ahead. I know I'm doing something on another screen, but I will bring it up onto the screen here 1 second. Because Docker Desktop, here's the dashboard for Docker Desktop. They have a built-in Kubernetes. So if you want to run a local Kubernetes, you can go here and just check this, and they will install a local Kubernetes. And it works great. So yeah, that is definitely something you can install and work with.
Nice. There's some integration there. Okay, I'll let you get back to the.
Sure. No, this is great. Interrupt with any questions. I love the Q&As is where we learn the most usually.
I like the questions.
We're excited. Container.
Yeah.
I love the questions. Keep it up.
So actually, if I could real quick, there might be, as far as like some people at different stages of understanding things, is there a quick, simple summary of like Kubernetes in the mix versus Docker and that?
So our tooling just works with Docker, and Docker is kind of the basic Docker desktop for Windows is what we're talking about specifically, or for Mac. On a Linux machine, to install Docker, there's not like a desktop product. There's a couple pieces you have to install. So the installation's it's not too tricky. It's a few extra commands, but regardless, Docker handles. They give you a command line: Docker run, Docker build. So Docker is going to handle the building of all of the images, and then when you do a Docker run, it's going to spin that image up into a container, and it's going to handle all the volumes and networks and stuff. It's doing that, nothing to do with Kubernetes at that point. And the tooling I'm showing you today doesn't do anything with Kubernetes. So there is in Visual Studio or in Visual Studio Code, there are some tools that Microsoft makes to help you see your Kubernetes clusters. There's a thing called Bridge to Kubernetes, which can help you, and that's a product that our sister team creates, and that can help you work with the Kubernetes cluster. So check out that if you're looking for some more stuff. And that's Bridge to Kubernetes. So I'm not going to get into that today. I'm going to stick just with let's call it the raw Docker images and containers. Okay. But yeah, good question, Jordan. They always seem to be related, but they're not. You can do all this container stuff without Kubernetes. Typically, Kubernetes is a very popular deployment option, but we have many more deployment options in Azure. We have Azure Container Instances, we have app services which can run containers, our functions, and so there are a number of other places, not just Kubernetes. So I've done. Oh, go ahead, Uche.
Real quick, sorry, to chime in on what Mike's saying. A lot of these product offerings are really well created to suit certain needs. So Kubernetes might not always be what you want, especially because Kubernetes definitely is focused on a multi-service or multi-application architecture, mostly kind of like a cloud native. I have 3 to 5 services all intertwined that need different architectural pieces, a database, a web API, and a function trigger and monitoring. Whereas if you're a person that has like static web pages, you might just want to run your application in app service and have a really nice, well-managed product that's meant for your certain use case. So of course, it just really depends on what you're trying to get out of your, like why you have Compose. Might just be because you have 3 different static websites. But if you have Compose that needs multiple services and that are very spread out and need certain Azure resources, then Compose might make more sense as for the complexity.
Yeah, and that's some good points. Thanks, Uche. And often people use Compose. In fact, I've added Compose support to both of these, and so you can see my Compose file, and the launch target now is Docker Compose. So if I hit F5. We're going to spin up both of these services, so I didn't have to do them individually. Again, if I have 3 or 4 or 5, like Uche said, this is where Compose is really handy. And there's a bunch of options that you might want to set on any of these services that you don't need to remember to put on the command line when you do a Docker run. So Compose is great for many reasons. Again, though, Compose often is used just by a lot of developers. This does not everyone, but a lot of developers use Compose just in the inner loop, even though they know they're going to deploy in a different way, like to Kubernetes, and they'll use Kubernetes manifests or Helm charts. But still, Compose can be a great inner loop solution. And then once you check your code in, your CI/CD will, and your DevOps folks, whether that's you, the developer, or a different human, will build that out to do the right thing. Whether it's doing Kubernetes and manifests or Helm charts, or whether it's going to put these out to app service or a function or something else, ACI or another cloud. So just want to point out, Compose is great inner loop, but you don't have to use it in production, although you can. So here I just hit F5, and again, you can see that both those...
question. Is there an option to add SQL Server instance on the Docker Compose?
So that's, wow, what an amazing question. I'm going to go ahead and hit stop here. So I'm going to stop that. And what I can do is I can come down here into my file, and if I wanted to add a database, I could say, let's say SQL.
We're doing it live.
Live, yes. Hopefully it works. I could do this, and I could say I want an image, and you can see we get some intelligence here. And I think it's MS SQL. I think. Let's try it. Let's see what it does. So really, all I'm doing here is I'm referencing an existing MS SQL image that's up in the cloud. So if I don't qualify which image or which registry it's coming from, it's going to come from Docker Hub. And I don't know that that's the right name. I was going to type in Redis because I know that one works. But you asked for SQL, so let's see. I actually don't think it'll work because I think with SQL, I need to say except the EULA, and there's a few other pieces. So I'm pretty sure this will fail. Yeah, so well, so far it hasn't failed. It's pulling the SQL image. So I got the right name because it's pulling it down. Maybe I shouldn't have because that's not a tiny image. So that might have been my demo that I had planned, and we didn't talk about Kendra, so this is awesome, was I was going to add Redis to this. So I was going to type Redis DB, and then I was going to type image, Redis, latest. And then when I hit F5, it would pull down that Redis image and spin up that local version of Redis on that same network, so my application could easily reach out and ping it. So I think this is a great time while I'm downloading this very large image. So that's Compose. I'm going to switch over to Uche here in about 10 seconds, and he's going to show you a really cool Compose feature. Because remember, you could have 3, 4, 5, 10 services in this Compose file, and you don't always want to start all 10 of them every time you hit F5. So Uche, take it away. Show us some great features that you and the devs on our team, and we have some amazing devs. I'll turn it over, Uche.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Great presentation, and good on you for running through pretty much such a large amount of our product. So
Thanks,
Uche. So I'll start off.
This is Uche and I's mascot. This is Duke, because Uche is like a superhero. So I just use him as our mascot. I'm just kidding.
Thanks. You're too kind all the time. But yeah, so to start off, we talked to a lot of customers last year, and we got so much good feedback on what different things to take on. Obviously, there's always more that you always wish that you could get to for our customers and users, but we do what we can that can hopefully cause the most impact and help out the most people, especially with productivity. So where we landed was improving a lot of different features in our CTW containers tool window, and with that we have a couple things, and I'll go ahead and share my screen, and I will let you know. I'll apologize right now. My internet may be shaky, so I may have to go off camera, but I'm sharing right now.
I don't have your screen yet. Oh, here it comes.
So I'll jump into Visual Studio.
Little Little delay on the StreamYard end.
Here, can you guys see it?
There we go. Yeah. I got it now.
Awesome.
Good.
Awesome. So I don't have the cool fancy tools that Mike has, and I also have one screen only. So if you need me for anything, Kendrick or Jordan, please just say it out loud.
Sure.
But right now we have right here we have a more complex Docker Compose file that I'm just starting off with, because by running it, I'll be able to showcase quite a few pieces of our container tool window. Mike has already shown everything we really need, which is if I wanted to, add container orchestration support, it's like add and whatnot, add orchestration support. He also showed how to get to this container tools window. Although by running a Docker Compose, hitting F5 on Docker Compose, you generally will get some sort of container tool window pop-up. So right here, we have a few things that we're taking advantage of that I want to call out early on. We have a demo app. This is our actual regular application. We have Redis. We have our Redis cache and a regular database, which, funny enough, is using MS SQL Server with the correct environment setup.
Oh, that's perfect.
Passwords and EULAs.
Oh
Yes.
man, I feel like I got tricked there, Kendra.
Mike, you should have just passed to Uche. Come on.
You gotta pass the ball. Pass the ball. Just kidding. So right here, I'm gonna hit F5.
Like passing the buck?
No, it's
different.
It's passing the presentation to your PM code.
Oh, I see.
So I'm gonna hit F5 here, and we're gonna see what happens. As Mike showed before, this is going to go ahead and build our entire application. I had a partner developer on our team who created this application for me, and it showcases what I mentioned, which is that all three, we have demo app, Redis, and this database, is all on the same network. And it's going to take a little bit of time to load, but it's going to pop up in a website for us that will showcase what we have. In the meantime, as that's happening, I want to showcase one of the new features within that Docker Inc., Docker Incorporated, has created, called Compose Profiles. And this will come in handy later on, because Compose Profiles allow you to select, hey, I only want this type of profile to run these services. So you'll notice that with Redis has, we started debugging, the orange, it's everywhere. But right here, you see that there's three services I have: demo app, Redis, and DB. And with Redis is all three, and no Redis is only 2 out of the 3. Now, this is important to note that if I don't declare any profile on something, it's included in everything by default, which is just a design decision. But it sort of makes sense if you just newly added a new service and you don't know really where to put it yet. You might as well run it rather than saying you have to include it. Any questions so far?
Nothing popping up yet. I think we're good.
Awesome. Okay, great. So right here you'll see a demo app. This is an ASP.NET Core web application, as is our favorite, and it's connected to a Redis cache that actually it stands at the front of this application, and it allows us to persist how many times I've clicked the home button, which is AKA how many times I've refreshed this current alive page. If I actually X out of this and open it up again, the Redis cache will hold this memory, and it'll still have that it's number that I've refreshed 8 times. And this is also connected to the local database. They all interact on the same network to make this work. Now what happens if I X off? I'm going to X this off. Actually, I shouldn't. No, that's fine. So right now I don't have a running instance of the application, but I do have the containers that were created. And this is going to allow me to show off some of the cool features that we've worked on. On the side, you see the output window. This isn't as important, so I'm going to slide it over. But here we have a few containers. So if you see in line with my my services, we have a few things, such as the Redis image, has labels. That's important. And we're going to show off a couple volumes that I've also created within Redis. So if I click on Redis, we have environment, which has always been around. These are some environment variables that may be important. We have labels. Oh, crazy. Azure Cloud is your best friend. Did you guys know that?
Nice.
And so the container tool window gives you a really short at a glance ability to see important details about your container without having to go into the inspect file. We also see something that is a new feature. Labels was new this last release, where you can actually very easily see all the labels that are on your every specific image, including say database. And also a very highly asked for feature that I'm excited to show is our volumes tab. So this shows all of the volumes that are actually connected to the running instance of your container. This includes,
Wow.
I would show off my demo app, but it does show a lot of my like Uche documents, etc. So it's not as fun. But this is awesome.
So helpful, though, especially like clearly marking the source and destination. I think I'm always confused when I'm writing my Docker files, like where I usually like just give up and put a period and then I try to narrow it down as I go. But like, yeah, that's super helpful.
And one thing I want to call out there, Uche, is before you show Kendra something even cooler, don't click on that yet, is volumes. For those that are maybe new to containers, volumes allow you to kind of mount a volume that's on your host machine, so on your laptop or desktop, and you actually are mounting it into the container. So when the container runs, you actually can see that volume that's out on your host file. So it lets you share data between your host file and so I just wanted to point out that
my syntax was wrong. Yeah, I was thinking of the copy command with the periods. Okay, that is better.
I just wanted to call out why we use volumes, and so there'll be a lot of data in those volumes.
No copying.
Yeah,
it's just a read from your disk.
Yeah,
got it.
And so there's really often there's really interesting data inside those volumes too, right, Uche?
Absolutely. So real quick, I'll actually show off a little bit of what Mike is saying. Don't be too upset at me for my really long file path, but on the left and right, especially for sources, as you can tell, Redis is its own image. So I can actually go and click on this source. But for my demo app, I could go ahead and click on my, this is a really great view for developers because I can actually see that, oh, the VS debugger was actually mapped into a certain destination, and I can interact with that if I, truly want to. People can get into the very nitty gritty. We also see where in whack source of the entire demo app, where is this coming from? It's coming from my actual directory where my app lives. So these are really good ways for people to learn about containers in general, to see, okay, yeah, things are being mapped into a certain destination or being used. And in the case of Redis, I went ahead and added my own volume called We Added Data. And so if I click on this destination, what do I get? It actually sort of runs hopefully my computer doesn't freeze. Okay.
Whew. Whoa, tiny file explorer in Visual Studio. Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
From Visual Studio, we have the ability to actually go into the container, and we've now made a visual that allows you to very easily interact with anything. You can just imagine what kind of files you could have. I didn't actually add anything to this file, but it's just we added data. And I can actually right-click and either open or download an actual file in my container, and I can interact with it that way. Open it, interact with it, download it, open it on my local machine. And this just helps productivity so much. Instead of doing all types of funky commands to get into your container and then somehow get it over to your machine, we make it very easy, and we are really excited about how this improves developer productivity. Also, as this container is running, you can go ahead and immediately jump into the container and see its logs outputted in a great format. One thing I'll also mention is if I right-click on my, say, demo app, I can actually open the terminal window of this container. So I can say, click Open Terminal Window, and as it loads, which is, it's mostly my machine, everyone, I promise.
This is so nice. As someone who was using Docker tools like long before we had anything in Visual Studio, and it was just, what containers am I running? I don't know. Switch to my, command line access or open Docker desktop and switch contexts and all of that. Oh my gosh, this is so nice.
Exactly. And so as you can see what I'm doing right now, I'm multitasking so easily. I have my demo app open. I just opened it in the terminal window. I clicked on files to say, oh yeah, man, like I needed to, it could be a million things. I needed to delete this one file on my container or edit this one file in my container to get the rest of my application to work. I'm actually able to sit here and actually say, oh, right now I'm in /app. All right, great. Like what's in /app? I can quickly like look through it. This might be important to some. Okay, I need to get into my app settings.json or delete it for some reason. So I know I can just in app go straight to app settings.json, etc. Or I can just open up bin, say, oh yeah, I need to get to all these files. I don't have to ls. I don't have to keep cding into it. I can jump right into it. Maybe I needed to do some funky edits, and I would be able to go into bash mode. And I can't remember the command to say edit app settings.json. Is it maybe cat?
That seems right. Can
Yeah,
at least
but whatever.
what's in it. Yeah.
Yeah, open it, and if I was much more well versed in PowerShell, I'd be able to jump into it with Vim and then edit it. Just can't remember the commands right now, but I'm really excited for these features because we know that it's what developers will really help our developers. So now let me actually take a quick step over to another concept, which is what do I do when we've talked to many developers who their work processes started becoming really funky because they say, hey, Docker Tools team, I have one compose file that has 15 services, especially as the cloud native grows and more multi-service applications are created. I have 15 services in my compose file, and I just want to run 5 out of those 15. So right now, what I have to do, and some of them are a little bit upset. They're just like, what you guys are making me do is I have to split my whole application into 3 or 5 different compose files, and I have to run that specific compose file to just run my front end, or to just run my back end, or to run some mixture of the two. And so
Yeah.
when we got down to the customer need, we realized, okay, so they have one main compose file that they need to then split up in multiple ways because they have no flexibility to run a specific subset of services. So with a lot of help from Mike and a lot of help from our dev team, we created this, and I'm really excited to show this new feature. So there's 2 ways you can get to it. Once you have already added Docker orchestration support, by getting your compose project, you can either right-click. This is going to be available in our next GA. It's already available in preview 2, and it will be available in preview 3 and 4 as well. I right-click on the compose project, and I can actually
16.10 update 16.10 preview 2 or 1 or 2. Okay.
Yes, perfect. In preview 2, 16.10, this is now available and it's there's been minor changes, but it'll absolutely be ready to go in 16.10 GA as well. So it's already available preview 2. Please check it out. Start giving us your feedback. We really look forward to it, and we want to make this feature as good as possible to help out our developers. So if I right click on the Docker Compose project, you'll see Manage Docker Compose Launch Settings. For me, I actually I gravitate to the debug dropdown, so I naturally just sort of click this right caret, and I also click Manage Compose Launch Settings, and we have 2 options you can take advantage of. So you'll see that it reads through our Docker Compose file on the left, and if I were to have absolutely no compose profiles written throughout my Docker Compose file, then I wouldn't get this option because naturally I wouldn't be able to choose between certain Docker Compose profiles. But I actually don't want to override my favorite, Docker Compose services all up. So I'm going to create a new launch profile called No More Redis. And hit OK. So now that I have this new launch profile, I have options. I can either individually select services, and you'll see that .NET services have the ability to have a do not start or start without debugging, whereas Redis only has either don't start me or they can't start without debugging. You have the ability to do a few other cool, nifty browser launched URLs where you can launch to a specific service if you had 15 of them. But for now, I'm going to use what I find to be the easiest, and I'm going to use Docker Compose profiles, and I'm going to select my Compose profile that is no Redis. So as you can see, this immediately filters the list down to database and demo app. I love this feature. This is really powerful. Right now, it's so simple with just 3 services. But imagine a list of 15 where you're like, I have to comment out 5 out of the 15, and now I have to uncomment it. Instead, we give you this functionality right in front of your face. So I'm going to click OK.
Just to confirm, I can either use the profiles that are part of the Docker Compose syntax, or if I'm not using the profiles, which is a fairly new Docker Compose feature, I can just select. I can manually select whatever services I want to start up. So I can do either one of those that I want.
Exactly. So if I go ahead and do this.
That's so useful. I actually wish we had something like closer to that for the testing is actually kind of in the same realm with like people want to configure test runs in certain situations to only run certain things. And right now we just have like multiple run settings files, but we don't have like a kind of, we have a way to set it, but it's not like an easy multi-select drop down or you know, all of this stuff. So this is super cool.
Yeah. So to go along with what Mike is saying, I'm going to go ahead and comment out these profiles. What's up, Mike?
No, I was just saying that's awesome. I do want to remind we want to leave a few minutes to look at VS Code also. So if you want to wrap up here, but no, go ahead and finish wrap up.
Absolutely. If you have... I just have one more thing to click. So if we were to comment this out, we would open it up, and we might get like a little error because we edited a file and made a profile that it's not going to be happy about. Yep. But there is no Docker Compose profile. So this makes it easy when a user's not using that, they can toggle between. So let's actually get rid of that and uncomment our friends here. And go ahead and hit the run button because we're almost done. So I'm going to click no more Redis and let's see what happens. It's going to build just our Compose profiles. And we'll see what happens in once our application pops up. We're almost there.
So I'm expecting it to not have this like database memory that it had before. Is that?
Good guess.
That's what I'm thinking.
You might have spoiled the surprise.
No, I don't. That's what everyone else should, as a fellow audience. Dang it! Sorry. Me too.
Tisk tisk. So it's gonna pop up.
I'm that person in the theater who's like, it's. Watch out! I just ruin things. Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Oh wait. Oh, so I must have done it. Let's see what I did wrong. No more Redis. Manage Compose launch setting. No more Redis. There's no Redis. Oh, let's see. If I go to my launch settings.json, I can actually take a look at my no more Redis. And yeah, it's no Redis. Could be just a user error.
Yeah, I'm sure.
What did you have in that environment? Was the database used to persist some of the numbers from before too? So does that have the
like maybe now the new numbers won't be present?
Yeah, I'll try to make.
I think it's StreamYard that messed it up. No, I'm just kidding.
You can't blame it for this. We can talk about latency for streaming, but oh man. Well, I think we kind of do get the vision. Yeah. Do we want to spend the next few minutes debugging this a bit, or do we want to go over to VS Code? Because we did get a VS Code question in chat. It was it was like, hey, shout out to fantastic VS Code Docker extensions as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love Mike to have a chance to go ahead and check out our VS Code tools. Yeah. So it's like a few seconds away, but it may break again. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
All right,
we'll stick to it. We can.
I'll go ahead and share my screen again, if you don't mind, Uche.
Sure.
1 second.
1 second. Let's see if we get there. Oh,
darn
I'm
it.
so sorry.
Almost.
No worries.
Okay.
Did it work? Did it work? Okay.
Oh, sorry. I
No,
appreciate
sadly, it did not.
the continued efforts. We like going all the way. Cool.
All right. So I will make this quick because I know we want to kind of wrap up here. But yeah, we have obviously great Visual Studio container tooling, but we also have some great tooling over in VS Code for folks that are using VS Code. And what I'll do is I'll just show you, if you bring up the command palette, you can add container tooling to your project pretty easily. And I'll do that. And if you just type in Docker, you can see one of the top things is add Docker files to your workspace. So if you want to, basically similar over in VS Code where I did right click add Docker, if you do this, a little mini wizard will walk you through and you'll pick your language and a few other things. And when that's finished, it will add a Docker file for you. And actually here is a Docker file here that got added, and you'll notice it looks very similar, if not almost exactly the same. You can also choose to add Docker Compose. It'll ask you a question, do you want to add Docker Compose? So bottom line is we make it really easy over in VS Code to scaffold the Docker files and stuff that you need. We also scaffold, when you do that, we scaffold some launch JSONs as well as a few tasks down here that are specific to Docker. And what that lets you do is really easily just come here and pick whether you want to run it inside of a container or not. I can just say, hey, I want to run it in Docker. I can hit F5 and it'll work very much like what I showed you over in Visual Studio. So we have a lot of parity there. It's not complete parity. Our Compose tooling is a little more robust over in Visual Studio, especially with the new feature that Uche showed you. But we do have some great support over here. And not just for .NET. I know we're on the .NET show here, but we support Node and Python really well also. So if you're using those languages, and so here's an application here that has both a web API and a web app that I wrote in Node, or that I copy and pasted in Node. And I can do debugging of these also. So it's pretty handy. Let me flip back over to that other project because I have a Compose file here. And very similar to Visual Studio, I can just come to this Compose file and say Compose up. And actually, if I say Compose up, select services, I get a mini version of what Uche just showed you. It comes up and it says, well, which of those services do you want to start? Do you want to start them all? Or do you want to just start 2 of the 3? So it's not nearly as fancy as what Uche showed over in Visual Studio, but we do have a very similar functionality as far as starting a subset of services. So I'm just going to start all 3 of those. And then Uche and I both showed you the container tool window. Go ahead, Uche.
I just wanted to have a little tidbit of data information. Since we've created this feature starting around January, I'm really excited because about 1 out of the people who use Docker Compose up, 1/4 of them are using this subset of services. So it's really exciting to see that in this growing architecture, a lot of people really do care about running 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5. So yeah. I implore you to check it out. It can be really useful.
That's a great point. So we've gone ahead and we've done a Compose up. It may or may not have worked. We'll look. What you'll find here is we have the little Docker icon, and this is very similar to the Explorer that we have over on the other side, and that didn't work for some reason. Of course, let's see why. It says failed to build. Look up. I don't know why that didn't work. Let's do this instead. Let's see if we can run just a single one. Looks like we had a build there actually, but let's try this. Because what you'll see here is when we go to this, you can see the images I have on my local machine, very similar to what you saw in the container tool window. You can see here, so that order proc started up. I can hover over that order proc container that's running, and I can see the related things. I can see those volumes that Uche showed you. So again, a little different look and feel because it's VS Code, not VS, and so we don't have tool windows to say. But you can do a lot of those similar things that you saw over in Visual Studio. You can view the logs for this order processing thing. If this had a UI, I'd be able to open it in the browser, but this is a background processor.
And Mike, could you open up one of the images and hover over that image as well, just to in the images tab? Yeah.
Yep. One second. Let me open one that's a little more fun.
And hover over that. Yeah, you can see the associated containers currently running from that image. So it's another way to just tie things back.
So if I do that for this one, you'll see that I should have, there we go, associated containers. So this image is up and running, and it's this order proc dev that I have right up here. And so we give you a lot of information between images and containers and networks and volumes. I can expand these here. You can see that I can see my networks, volumes again. We have a volumes tab. Let me shrink down some of these so we can see that. I can easily, volumes kind of add up over time because they don't get cleaned up necessarily automatically. So I can prune these. I can say, hey, I want to prune all the volumes that are not actively being used. And you should see, I just removed 18 volumes. So I reclaimed.
That was scary. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Pruning everything. Docker pruned me. Scary.
It's very, I feel enlightened that I can just feel like good about doing that and not worry that I destroyed something.
That's really amazing. It's come really far if you can just kind of right click prune without, it's great.
Yeah, and again, that only got rid of volumes that are not being used, just like I can get rid of all of the images that aren't being used. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. And then if you are using Azure, I want to point out that if you install the Azure extension, you can actually view your Azure registries right here. So I have an ACR, Azure Container Registry,
nice.
and I can go see exactly what's up in. Let me minimize that. I can see all of the images that are up in my Azure Container Registry, or if you're using Docker Hub, we support Docker Hub also, and we do support a few other cloud registries, and there's extensibility points for people to add others. But I can come in here and I can see exactly what labels I have, and I can even, from right here, I can even click on this label here, and I can deploy it straight to Azure Container Instances or straight to Azure App Services. So we have some integration points. So if you are using the Azure cloud, you can install this extension and be able to do that. There's a bunch of other things that I don't have time to show you, but we have not complete parity, but very similar functionality between Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. So use the one that makes most sense. If you're a hardcore .NET developer, you're probably using Visual Studio because I think we have a lot better language.
Real quick, Mike.
Yes, sir.
Real quick, click that drop down right next to the container that order proc, just to expand it real quick. The order proc, the container that's running, not the image, the container.
Yep. And you want to see the files.
Oh man, you got the File Explorer too.
Bang. Wanted to make sure.
Yes, sir. That's a great point. We got the File Explorer. That's a really great thing. And again, you can download files and stuff just like you could over in Visual Studio. I can just say double click on this YAML file, and now I'm going to be looking at the YAML file that's inside of the container. So yeah, very similar functionality. That's a great one, Uche.
Wow, this has come so far. I was like a .NET and Docker person a few years ago, and it is so cool to see it developing and getting so much easier to use. Because I think my biggest thing was like first just everyone everyone getting into containers and the mode and how they work and why they're useful. And oh my gosh, now that they're also easier to use is just. That's great. It's definitely limiting like the learning curve, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. If I had more time, I'd show you this last thing, but I won't. I'll just mention that these contexts are something new, and I can actually create a context. This is actually a context that's attached to ACI, and I could actually set this as my active context. And now, if I actually do a Docker run, this will actually be running up an ACI because I've attached to that ACI instance. So it's pretty awesome. If you want to run something up in Azure, you can do it without having to learn all the Azureisms. You can do it right from our tools. But I do agree. We've brought our tools a long ways, and they can really help you be really efficient doing your container development. So try out our tools. We'd love it. The Visual Studio tools are part of the cloud workload inside of Visual Studio. And then the extension is up on the gallery. You can easily find it just by typing in Docker, and you'll find that over here in the extensions in the marketplace. So give them a try and let us know how you like them.
Very cool. Okay, we just got a few questions to wrap up, I think, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, and thanks, Mike, for wrapping up things so quickly after I took quite a chunk of time on Visual Studio. Appreciate that.
Love it.
I should have warned you guys, like when you're chatting and questions and live stream, like a 10-minute demo will turn into a 20-minute demo really easy. So if you have 40 minutes of content, it's going to go over an hour for sure.
Yeah.
So good though. Okay, so one of them was a general question. Is there any benefits to Dockerizing a .NET Framework application? I know we were talking a lot about .NET Core, .NET 5. Those are like the small, they can deploy to Linux, but .NET Framework, do we have Docker images for that?
We definitely do. We support, and I'd say they have very, very similar benefits. As you can have your application along with any of your dependencies, and you will be using a Windows image, which is quite a bit bigger. So that initial pulling down of the image will take a couple minutes rather than 30 seconds. But that's typically a one-time thing, or once every month you pull a new image down. But then you can build that image using that Windows base container with all of your dependencies, and you get that same great benefit of having that image that's very handed off to DevOps or deploy it anywhere you want. So yeah. Absolutely, there's benefits for Dockerizing a .NET Framework app.
Very cool. And how to add a remote debugging feature for Docker container as it's deployed in Kubernetes or somewhere else? Can you connect, I guess, attach the debugger to a container that's deployed?
So no, we don't have remote, like attaching to a remote container running. Yes and no. No, our Docker tools don't necessarily support that. You can do some remote stuff when you get into like remote containers using the Visual Studio Code, remote containers, or remote SSH, but that's not doing a remote debugging session. That's kind of doing a remote VS Code session. And then our extension, for the most part, is running on that remote machine. But to truly do a remote connection, no, we don't do, remote debugging. That said, there is the thing I mentioned earlier, which is Bridge to Kubernetes. And that is a tool that our sister team builds that runs both VS Code and VS. And that does interact with a live Kubernetes cluster that's running in Azure or anywhere, on-prem, a local Kubernetes cluster. And with that, let's say you have an application that's made up of 10 services, and all 10 of those services are running in the cluster, but you want to debug just one of those, and you have that code on your local machine. You can actually make it look like your machine is part of that cluster. You can debug that one service on your local machine while it's talking to the other 9 services up in the cluster. It's pretty awesome technology, and that's called Bridge to Kubernetes. So different product, try it out. It's pretty awesome.
Very cool. Great, Jordan. Do you have any sort of final questions for Mike and Uche about container tools?
I know there was, just as far as we demoed a bit with ASP.NET Core, and you talked on some .NET Framework like container images. The tooling that's integrated in the tools, is that just work with .NET Framework projects as well as .NET Core projects, so folks can try their existing stuff and move it into cloud containers if they wanted?
Yeah, that's a great question. We support .NET Core and .NET Framework, and in both we support ASP.NET, so web apps, web APIs, and then also console apps. So if you're writing a console app to maybe, like a worker process to pull things off a queue or something like that, our tools support those also. And then lastly, which I need to start working this into my demo is functions. We actually support, if you're working in Visual Studio and you're working on a functions project, you have that same, excuse me, that same capability to right click and add Docker support to a function. And now when you F5, that function will run in a container locally, and you get those same benefits. So yeah, that's another thing I didn't point out, but that's also supported.
We we could talk about this for hours. We'll have to have you on again soon to just keep going over stuff. I'm sure you get questions about the remote debugging. I know people want to remotely debug their tests running on their servers because they're getting different results because of different environments. So it's all, people are definitely always thinking in that realm.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that remote debugging type thing is pretty cool, and especially with WSL2. And I know Kendra, that's come up a lot with the test tools. But we recently added a feature. This is separate from our container stuff, but I just want to mention it because for .NET developers that they want to run their program in a Linux environment, but maybe not as a container. We have an option in the dropdown that says I want to debug with WSL2. Actually, you surprised me.
Sorry, I heard you clicking around, and I thought maybe.
Yeah, if I really quick here, just gonna open that project, and it's not containerized, but what you'll see here is you can run this. I can debug this in WSL2. So if I just select WSL2 there and hit F5, I'm actually going to run that application over in my WSL2 environment, which is Windows subsystem for Linux, if folks aren't familiar with that. And it's basically a Linux environment inside of Windows. And I get this full debugging support. This was not part of my demo, so I may not be up to date with everything. But just F5 away, and I'm debugging inside of Linux, which is pretty awesome. So that's kind of just to tag off of your remote debugging. That's another great thing that you can do.
Yeah, we've gotten feedback that saves people a lot of time whenever they are a cross-platform developer.
Yeah. So just like that, I now have my application running in my WSL2 environment. And when I demo this, I usually print out the environment name, and you'd see that it says Linux rather than Windows. So not a container thing, but hey, what the heck? We're on a roll. Just want to make sure people know we have some great features out there that can really make their life easier. But thanks so much for having us, Kendra.
Thank you for coming on. Yeah, I think that wraps it up.
I'm gonna go play some pinball. So
it's been calling your name.
Oh, listen, it's talking right now.
I think it's gonna.
We went over that half hour mark.
Oh, and I would say,
there it is.
Kendra, I would say for everyone that's interested in Docker tools and VS Code, stay tuned for more of our features coming up in the future. We've heard we want to continue to increase their productivity and make a lot of the container tool window you saw in Visual Studio really pop with a few more features that makes it really clear what's going on. Maybe some Docker statistics of like how hot your container is running, things that we're right now just in the process of planning out for. But we really do have a great belief that the more we can show of what's happening in a person's container for each service, the better productivity developers have. So that's another big horizon effort that we're thinking about, as well as possibly improving IntelliSense, as we've figured out many developers really enjoy authoring. Well, enjoy is up to them, but definitely get into authoring, compose files, and Docker files. So we want to help out with that process, whether it be in Visual Studio or VS Code.
Yeah, on this stream, we find tooling delightful. This is where we're at. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I think that wraps it up for today. Community, thank you so much for all of your questions. There's lots of excitement in chat, lots of people getting involved. And I shared the URL list. I can share it again. It just links to the container docs, so you could get more in depth on what Mike and Uche are talking about, what they're bringing.
Hey, Uche, I gotta say one last thing. First, thank you so much, Kendra, Jordan. This was great. Uche, great job. I love presenting with you because we tag team well. I have this video that I was kind of wanting to play at the end, but I don't know if it's allowed. So I don't know, Uche.
I don't have any rules on my stream.
I'm going to leave it up to Uche.
Right, Jordan?
It has a word in it that rhymes with class that is known as a curse word.
Okay, so maybe we shouldn't show it then. That's a good
Ye
point.
old A word. Okay.
It's a great video. Maybe we'll have Uche re-record it without that one word so we can show it next time.
I am fascinated with
Teaser
how
is
this
there. I
is
love it.
incorporated to develop tools. Oh my gosh, I love my job.
Now you have to have Uche and I back on the show, right?
Yep.
That's
I put
true.
on
It's
shades and then I rapped about our tools.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. I'll see you all next month or at Build.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Appreciate all the comments that I've been reading in the stream. Thanks, Jordan, and thanks, Kendra, again.
Cool. Bye.
Take care, all.